Hello, my name's Lucille Tetley-Brown and I'm a doctoral researcher at the University of Glasgow in the School of Social and Political Sciences. This is submission 3438, Unlocking Public Value from Personal Data, Brokering Citizen-Centred Data Use Spaces for the Private Sector, the Scottish example.
Hi, I'm Angela Daly. I'm Professor of Law and Technology in the Leverhulme Research Centre for Forensic Science and Law School at the University of Dundee.
Hi everyone, I'm Esperanza Miyake. I'm a Chancellor's Fellow in Journalism, Media and Communication at the University of Strathclyde.
Hello, I'm Annie Sorbie. I'm a Senior Lecturer in Medical Law and Ethics at the University of Edinburgh.
So this is an overview of our presentation. We will first give some background to the independent expert group, which has been set up and of which we're all members, before looking at the Scottish context, draft principles that we have formed in the expert group, some key issues in the form of public benefit and public interest, challenges, and then next steps. Just at the outset, it's important to note that some of us are members of the independent expert group, we do not represent the independent expert group with our views, nor the Scottish Government. We're participating and offering our thoughts on the basis that we are independent academic researchers.
So the Unlocking the Value of Data programme started in March of 2022, although its inception commenced earlier, probably around 2019, and links to the most recent digital strategy for the Scottish Government, A Changing Nation, How Scotland Will Thrive in a Digital World. The intention is to maximise data resources and achieve the outcome of being a leading ethical digital nation. The programme is informed by an independent expert group who are which is made up of people from different sectors, public, third, private sector, and who all work with data and data use.
So the independent expert group and the Unlocking the Value of Public Data programme take place in a broader landscape of data policy in Scotland. So to give some context of this broader landscape, there are a series of governance mechanisms for data, either held by the public sector or personal data more generally. So particularly when it comes to personal data protection legislation, currently the Data Protection Act 2018, which is a UK-wide piece of legislation, governs the use and processing of personal data, including in Scotland. In Scotland, there are also a series of mechanisms, institutes called trusted research environments or safe havens, which facilitate access, particularly research involving public sector data, including personal data. So particularly healthcare data is a prominent example. And these are mechanisms which facilitate research, but aim to preserve privacy and data security, and also the public benefit and public interest in doing so. And another important feature of the Scottish data policy landscape is a series of open data initiatives that the Scottish Government has commenced, but particularly important is their open data policy from 2015. The Scottish Government and the Scottish public sector, and while there are some UK-wide policies and particularly legislation, it nevertheless has attempted to formulate a distinctive, what it terms as ethical and also citizen-centred policy in the use of data, but particularly public sector personal data. And there are questions about to what extent this shows some divergence or separation from UK level policies or policies in other parts of the UK, so in England, Wales, Northern Ireland. As part of the independent expert group's work, we have formulated a series of draft principles to guide private sector access to public sector personal data in Scotland. There are 9 principles and they are still open for consultation and input. So if anyone is interested, they can get in touch with us and give us your thoughts on them. We're going to concentrate on a couple of these principles, or one principle in particular, public interest and public benefit, but other principles foreground public engagement and involvement, do no harm, precaution, transparency, law, ethics and best practice, the right to opt out, enabling conditions and regular review.
So during the course of our work, a number of issues have come to the fore around, in particular, draft principle 2, which I'm going to concentrate on this segment of the presentation. So this is entitled Public Interest and Public Benefit, and states that all access to public sector personal data sets must be done in the public interest and must also produce public benefit. So discussions within with stakeholders have led to questions about how these concepts should be understood in the context of this project and the data sharing landscape in Scotland and beyond more generally. So in discussing these issues, it's emerged that it's important to learn from existing work in this area around the use of these terms in the context of various data usages. So in this section of the presentation, I'm going to briefly consider what we know about public benefit and public interest in the data context, before drawing out 3 key implications that this existing research has for the work of this project. So in relation to public benefits, the literature tells us that demonstrable public benefit is the most prevalent consideration that publics have around private sector access to and use of public sector data. So more recent studies have considered more specific questions about this terminology and how public benefit assessments should be conducted. So who are these publics to whom benefits should accrue, and what sort of benefits are these? So we might look outside the data context, so for example, to charity law, where guidance on the public benefit requirement points to 2 aspects of this, so the benefit aspect and the public aspect. The benefit aspect provides that a purpose must be beneficial and that any detriment or harm that results from the purpose must not outweigh the benefit. With regard to the public aspect, this provides that the purpose must benefit the public in general or a sufficient section of the public and not give rise to more than incidental personal benefit. So there's a couple of issues coming out there. We can also look more specifically to the data context and work conducted with participants in Scotland by Aitken and others on participants' expectations of data-intensive health research. And this has indicated that the term public might be construed broadly so that data usages can benefit as many people as possible, but also that understandings of relevant publics might also be needs-led. In other words, there may be broader public benefit in research using data that benefits a smaller group or number of people in need. Similarly, participants' preferences in terms of the types of benefits was to keep this broad. So, for example, the research I've talked about in the context of health research indicated that these benefits were not just seen as medical benefits, but also things such as living longer, happier and healthier lives. A really interesting aspect of that research was also that publics were concerned that such benefits should be measurable and that these would actually be realised through the actions of key stakeholders, such as policymakers, governments, and in the case of that research, health services. So that brings us to the public interest. And indeed, notions of the public interest can be equally, if not more, elusive. In broad terms, it's been claimed that actions taken in the public interest can be broadly described as those that promote objectives valued by society. Indeed, more specifically in the context of data use, the public interest is a prominent feature of the policy and legal regimes that govern the use of confidential data, for example, in data protection legislation and the common law duty of confidentiality. However, this legislation and case law do not provide a definition of what is or is not in the public interest. What's clear, however, is that much like public benefit, the public interest is also deeply contextual. And so perhaps we should consider what the public interest does rather than solely what it is. Here we see, for example, that the Information Commissioner in recent guidance on the research provisions in the UK's Data Protection Act 2018 and GDPR has suggested that the public interest in the context of research should be interpreted broadly to include any clear and positive benefit to the public likely to arise from that research. So the public interest covers a wide range of values and principles relating to the public good, or what is in the best interests of society. Elsewhere in my work, I've also made the connection between public interest and public benefit, and argued that a principal function of the public interest is to carve out a legally legitimate space within which activities that infringe on individual interests but have potential public benefits can be lawfully conducted, which otherwise would not be permitted. However, I've also argued for a conception of the public interest that's socially legitimate and point to the difficulties of defining the public interest on the basis of a homogenised conception of who the public are, and in the absence of engagement with actual public's views. So what are the implications of this research for the Unlocking the Value of Data programme, and from this indeed very whistle-stop tour through what's a rich body of literature? So I think the overarching point that emerges from this research is that is in relation to public engagement. So the data, it suggests that a bottom-up approach is preferred, whereby terminology such as the public interest and public benefit are terms that are co-constructed with publics in specific contexts, rather than defined in a top-down way. At present, a programme of public engagement is being taken forward by the Democratic Society, which will begin to inform how the public interest and public benefit are understood in the context of this project. However, there are other points that emerge from the previous research as well, and I'm just going to touch on 3 of these before handing back over to my colleagues. So first of all, how should we understand publics when we use terminology such as public benefit and the public interest? So this is in circumstances where the public is not a homogeneous block. So it raises questions about how the public is understood in broader or narrower terms, as well as directing attention to inequality and how unrepresented or underrepresented voices can be heard. Indeed, this echoes finding that there is no singular public perspective on private sector use of public data. Second, how should we understand the interests of these publics and the types of benefits that are expected to accrue from the use of public sector data? So this includes the relationship between benefits and harms, for example, and the extent to which public and private benefits can coexist. And third and finally, a key issue here is how these benefits or interests should be demonstrated over time. So these not only need to be demonstrated prospectively at the point at which decisions about access to data are made, but also how should these decisions to allow or deny data access be reviewed throughout the data use cycle in order to build learning into governance systems? Thank you.
Thank you for that. So I'm going to just briefly talk about some of the challenges and issues that we faced, and these are sort of broader issues, I think, that anyone considering data and public benefit will have to face. But I think Annie just covered some of the sort of complexities about terminology, and one of the things we've been grappling with and trying to think our way is the idea of value. So if we're unlocking the value of data, how do we define value? Well, I mean, what kind of value is that? Who defines it? And how, most importantly, how can we make sure that that value relates to public benefit and interest, which Annie just talked about? How can we ensure that this value is a positive benefit really to the public? So this goes back to how do we define it? How do we assess value even? And how do we make sure that data match how we use and unlock that data is used positively or is of benefit? So that's another issue of definition. A second challenge that we're constantly thinking about is what happens behind the scenes. So we all understand this idea of data and the data we do give away, but what is actually happening with that data once we let go of it? So a lot of public sector data, it's an infrastructural issue, involves public sector. So whether that's the technology or the platforms, data sits somewhere, and we might not necessarily have control over what these private sector companies, so it's anything as large as Google and Apple and their sort of app libraries, right through to the app designers, or basically the companies involved, the private companies involved, what data is being collected And what can we do about that? Again, that's a huge challenge, and it's something we need to think about, and we're constantly thinking about. And the third, and by the way, there are more challenges, but these are the key ones. One of the third ones that we're thinking about is also the ongoing resource needs if our draft principles are to be implemented. So not just the public engagement involvement, but all the other ones that Angela outlined at the start. How do we keep assessing, monitoring beyond the finite life of the IAG as technologies change, as the way people use technologies change, even something like the pandemic that changed completely the way we thought about the value of data, things like that we can't plan for change. How do we keep going with that? And how do we keep, what resources and how much resources are there? So it's a political economy issue here. But I will stop there and be brief and hand over to my colleague.
Thanks very much. So just to outline the next steps for the independent expert group and unlocking the value of data programme with the Scottish Government, we're currently working on an updated version of the principles, which will also come with a bit more in the form of recommendations, guidance and context, which we have already been working on, but we weren't quite ready to make it public at the same time as the draft principles. So there's still very much an opportunity to speak to us, to give us input, to connect with your own work if you're working on this topic or something relevant. So that is one of the major next steps, and we hope to have something to release in the coming months. And there will also be an operationalization stage planned for unlocking the value of data with the Scottish Government during 2023. So keep an eye out for that as well. You can find more information at the link that's here. Also, please kind of get in touch with us if you do want more information and updates as well. So at this stage, I'd just like to say thanks very much and look forward to hearing feedback.